Hello and welcome back to CSRM and Seed podcast. We're joined today by two veterans of local church, sports, and rec and fitness ministries. And very privileged to have both of you here. Dave Waddell, now teaching at Ole Miss. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And John Longworth, you are from Memphis, Germantown Baptist Church.
Correct.
And that's where the similarities start, because you both were there.
Correct.
But that's also where they end, maybe.
Not necessarily.
We're both terribly good looking and modest.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Humble besides. And both of these men served together at this church for a while, and we're going to tell that story a little bit today. And we're focused right now, for you, the local church recreator, sports minister, fitness director, you're always after volunteers. You're after leadership. You're trying to develop leaders. You're trying to give people opportunities to be local missionaries in your church through these activities. And we have a couple guys here that have been around that block more than once, and they really have done a great job at creating that kind of ministry and that kind of leadership team. But Dave, I'm going to start with you because you were actually the guy that recruited this guy to the table.
Yes.
And how did you decide he was just a warm body that was breathing, or did you see something, or how did that come about when you start thinking about going and finding that leadership team?
We had a great situation where upon my arrival at the church, John was already a very active participant and an active volunteer leader in both our sports and drama ministries. He coached, he worked with our Living Nativity, he did bits and pieces with other dinner theaters and events like that. So he was kind of a gift to me just by joining the church staff to have a quality volunteer like this. But you don't just sit back usually and get these. At some point, John had been recruited. My predecessor saw something in him and asked him to be a coach. And so that's how he got started in the process of being a volunteer.
So when you look for volunteers, what do you look for? What are the characteristics or the attributes or criteria?
The first thing I look at is their faith story. Are they a believer in Christ? Are they willing to share that belief with others? That's first and foremost. The second thing, do they love the age group of the people that I want them to work with? If they don't like children, I'm not going to have them coaching a children's team. If they hate senior adults, I'm not going to line them up for a clinic to teach senior adults. So they have to have an appreciation of the age group as well. And then I'd like for them to know a little bit about the sport or the activity that they're leading. They don't have to be, by any means a college level coach, but they need to understand the game enough that they can teach it to their teams.
And so you really have a specific kind of role for them in mind, and then as you're looking at people in your congregation, you're saying, I think that person could fit this or fit that. Correct.
And I always held the same standard for finding my coaches as our other ministers would for finding Bible study leaders or choral personnel, that I wanted that same level of dedication to Christ to coach a team. In other words, it wasn't a stepping stone type of ministry. I wanted the top dogs running the show.
And Dave, you say something there that really resonates within me. And I want to say this carefully and gently, but I think there's a lot of churches and the church leadership, they're just rolling a ball out. We don't have to think of them very highly of their spirituality or their depth of relationship with Christ. And as a longtime sports minister, that's really offensive to me, because these are the people that are on the front lines of, I think, this eternal spiritual battle.
Exactly.
And if they're not committed to Christ and they're not interested in that evangelistic disciple making that we talk about, then go over there and teach the Bible. Go over there and do the Bible school. To go over, I want the top. And by the way, I love Bible school and I love Bible studies.
I do too.
And I'm saying that just so that people, I think they often have a second-class citizenship for those in sports and rec.
I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, sometimes I found in the churches that I served that would be the mindset they had on the folks. Oh, so you're one of those that works in the sports ministry, or oh, you're one of those that helped out with the Halloween alternative carnival, and it was almost like the pat on the head, like good boy, good girl. You someday you'll grow up and be a real minister.
That's right. And we're trying to say that we want people that are really committed to this.
Exactly.
And as you said, it does help if they understand the sport.
And yeah, a little bit.
But actually, they can do ministry even if they don't understand the sport.
We've recruited many a coach that knew basically how to play the game, and we lined them up with an assistant coach that knew more about the game. But I lined up the head coach because of their love for the age group and their ability to set up relational evangelism with their team. So knowledge of the sport was my third criteria.
That's right. So John, now you come into this. You were attending the church as just a participant, member, attender, and what attracted you to that church?
Well, this is going to sound odd, but my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is a member of the church, and so when we moved back to the Memphis area, my wife convinced me that we should visit the church, and I told her that I'd be happy to do that because her mom was a member, but that I doubted I would enjoy it because it was a large church. I was accustomed to attending and serving in small churches, but we fell in love with the people and the ministries there, and we became members, and I was involved in a variety of ways for about 11 years before we began serving together on staff.
11 years. And you were telling this story earlier that you went in and said, I'm not going there because this was my mindset of a church and not that.
I had made up my mind.
What kept you there then?
Well, there were a lot of things. We got involved. We visited a Sunday school class and got involved in small group ministries. One of my best friends today, didn't know it at the time, but from that Sunday school class, he invited me to play on a men's softball team. And he today is one of my best friends still, and we competed to play the same position. And but it's the small groups through Sunday school, through sports ministry that we developed relationships, and the relationships are what kept us in the church through the years.
I hope you all are hearing what he's saying because this is key. Dave, you want to pick up on any of that?
It's just we serve in the leisure field of sports and recreation and fitness. We have such a great tie-in to relationships and such a great tie-in to people. People will open up more in leisure time opportunities than they will at other spots in their life. And so the opportunity for ministry is just rich. You get a person sweaty, you let them get their craft object that didn't look just quite right after it was finished, and you find out the real needs of people and how to minister to them.
It's a variation of what Plato said, but in our movement we say that people are at their learning best while having fun.
Yes.
And both of you guys like to have fun, and that's how you're moving people.
I was going to add to that as well. They're gathered around a sport or an event, an activity that they already have in common. And so you use that, whether it's a soccer ball or a basketball or you name it, you use that commonality to break down barriers and build relationships in order to advance the gospel.
It really is an accelerant to the relationship. I meet the guy in a parking lot. I can't even remember his name, but he's playing on my softball team, and he's just jacked one over the fence. He's barreled the ball over the fence, and he's coming across the home plate. And here's this guy that I can't even remember his name, and we're hugging.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I'd have hugged him in the parking lot, I would have gotten slugged.
That might have been odd.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there, it's an accelerant, is what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
In fact, just this past weekend, I experienced this in a baseball stadium in Cleveland, sitting there in the wrong colored shirt. And yet, by the end of a ball game, we were family.
Yeah.
We connected on things in the game. A good job, attaboy, way to go, good luck, you guys win the World Series this year. There's something about the leisure experience, sports, recreation, and fitness that is a draw to people, to draw to other people.
And we just got to say that the Indians are in first place.
Yes, and the Kansas City Royals helped them there.
That's this year, but we helped you a couple years ago.
You did, and thank you for that. I don't know if I ever sent the note.
We have a mutual respect for one another.
We do.
That's for sure. Now, John, I want you to talk a little bit about being the recipient of this wooing or courting or tapping on the shoulder. You were sitting there, and I think Dave said that the prior sports and rec minister was the one to tap you on the shoulder and get you involved. But then it was also Dave that, am I right, that asked you to come on the staff then?
Yeah. Actually, Dave was half correct, which is usually the case. Even before, my kids I have a son and a daughter, both in their mid-20s now, and even before we had children of our own, my wife and I wanted to serve, and so we asked Frank Drinkard at the time, who was our recreation pastor,
Frank Drinkard,
if
that's a
we
great
could
name.
coach a soccer team. And so we had no children of our own, and he allowed us to get involved and participate in that way and continued to give us opportunities. And so we had fun serving and just learning and growing.
What could you say to the sports and rec minister at this church that is watching or listening to this podcast, and they're trying to go recruit the Johns of their church? How can they do that? How do you do it?
I do a lot of begging. But beyond, seriously, I go back to what David said earlier. You don't want to put just anybody in a position of leadership. What we do is every bit as important as what other ministries are doing in the church, and so I don't want to settle for second best. I want people that are going to be active and involved and faithful and obedient in sharing their faith and sharing the gospel and using that environment, whether it's a baseball, softball, basketball, soccer team, whatever we do, using that as a tool to reach people to advance the gospel. So our standards are high. I don't want just a warm body out there, but we're always looking for people. We're trying to develop relationships, get to know folks. I have a lot of people, I look at parents, and there are a lot of folks who just don't feel like they have the skill set to coach a soccer team, say. And others who have that skill set but don't have the training to do the ministry portion. And so there are a lot of ways around that, but sometimes, as David said, we might combine forces, and I get someone to coach who knows the sport and someone else to help with that team who is very confident in sharing the gospel. Other times, we do what we can to equip people. I can teach someone how to cope in today's how to coach in today and to cope as well with all those kids. In today's world, there are some incredible tools that can equip people to coach. There are incredible tools that we have at our disposal to equip people to become confident in sharing their faith. One of the things I insist that my coaches do is we tell folks at the end of the season, and hopefully before that, but there is an expectation that I have, that my pastor has of our ministry, that my committee has of our ministry, that no one goes through our rec program, our recreation ministry, without having heard what it means to have a personal relationship with Jesus and how they can have that. And so I communicate that to my coaches, and I will tell them that if they're not confident, if they don't know how to share their faith, if they've not been equipped to do so, don't worry about that. I'll help you. I'll coach you. I'll equip you to do that. And then after having gone through that, if they're still not confident, then I'll tell them, I'll model it. You watch me. I'll do it, so that we guarantee that no one from that team leaves that season without having heard the gospel. And then if they're still unwilling to do it, they won't coach for me again. But I've done what I can to equip them, and then model for them, and hopefully put them in a position where it becomes second nature to them to share their faith.
You've done well, Dave. This guy knows his stuff.
He
doesn't
does, yeah.
Now, when do you start recruiting? Let's say that we've got the Pee Wee League coming up in September. How do you put that into your, because you got to put it into your calendar as a sports and rec person. How do you, it starts September, when do you start?
Previous September.
Yeah.
Right after the last one
Yeah.
was done?
I'll start during the, for example, if we're in soccer season right now, I'll start this season trying to ensure that the coaches I have now will come back.
You start with your core base.
Right.
You're always going to lose a couple, so you're going to have to replace them. What's the next step?
Talk to people, listen to people. There's a lot of hidden gems in your church that probably
Not
won't.
GYM,
No.
but GE.
GEMS, yes. Diamonds in the rough, so to
If
speak.
you've got a hidden GYM in your
Then
church,
cough it up, because
Yeah.
we can have more basketball teams. There are folks that have the ability to do things, but they are not going to tell you. Out of modesty, out of fear, they're not going to say, hey, I'd like to coach Pee Wee soccer, but they're capable of it. So you talk to people, you listen to people. You go to their small groups or people that work in children's ministry and ask them, who are the ones that are engaging with the children the most? And you can recruit new names that
it's a
way.
great thing. That's cross-pollinate between the children's ministries, the youth ministries, the men's ministry,
Exactly.
women's. How can we keep those people involved? We often in CSRM talk about a laborer's list, the Matthew 9, 37, 38 verses in there. The harvest is ripe, pray for the laborers. So I'm assuming here's the September. I'm thinking about September of 2018. I know I'm going to have 10 or 12 or 15 teams. I got to have blanks on this laborers list with specific names that I'm going to start praying for. You were going to say something.
Well, I was going to go back to what David said. There's so much value in relationship building and getting to know people when you're out of this whatever season it is, but listening, and you find out every once in a while you'll hear something that somebody says, and you have to think to yourself, there's potential there that I may want to tap into when we get around to baseball season or basketball season, and you keep up with that. However, you would do that, and you tickle them, and not literally, but you go back to them and try to recruit them, but you've got to listen, and you've got to build relationships all year long. And the relationships that we have with fellow staff members, that's key. For me to be able to sit down with a children's pastor or with the youth pastor and ask them who they think would be helpful and effective in those roles.
Because the more relationships that they have, the more likely they're going to transfer out of the sports into the sanctuary.
Exactly.
So we start a year ahead, we make this laborers list, that keeps us accountable, and then what do? We've got them on a list, now what do?
You do the ask.
And how do you do that?
Face-to-face, it's personal, and don't send an email, and sometimes I've gotten away with a phone call, but when I do that, it's someone that I have known in another way. But if they're new to the church or new to the ministry, I'll find an opportunity to get with them face-to-face and sell them on the program, sell them on what we're doing and how they can have a positive impact in the ministry.
I'll affirm what he's saying. 20-something years of church ministry leadership. I think I may have recruited 5 workers through phone or email. Most of it was a face-to-face, I need you to help in this.
Now, let's be honest, they didn't have email when you were doing this.
Okay. Then we'll go back to voice, now that I've been ratted out.
So, but do you think it's helpful to even maybe send a letter and say, I'm considering this, I have this, and I'm gonna follow up with you?
Well, you have to make people aware of the need.
Yes.
And sometimes that alone will get folks to step up and oftentimes step out of their comfort zones. I talk to people all the time who say, I don't know a whole lot about this or that sport, but if you get in a bind, and we're always in a bind, so I offer promotions. You get a lot of folks that will, on the registration form, indicate that they're willing to be assistant coaches. And so we're always in need of more head coaches, so I'll offer promotions to people, and I found that works a lot.
Okay, guys, we are going to move to another segment of this conversation. We're going to wrap this one up because there's somebody who's just completed their drive to work. They've been running on the treadmill for 20 minutes. They're done. And so we should be done. And then we're going to come back and pick it up. And when we get back together next time, for those of you that want to catch the rest of this, we're going to push that a little bit further. What's the next step to recruiting? And then I want to talk to you specifically about how do we make the differentiation between someone who's a volunteer, and we ask them for that, and how do we cherry pick the volunteers to become staff? And is there a different level of things we do? The other thing we're going to talk about with volunteers is how do we train them? What do we do once we've got them recruited? So, thanks for joining us on this CSRM Seed podcast, talking about how do we recruit local missionaries for the local community to serve in a mission that's called Sports, Recreation, and Fitness Ministries. I'm with Dave and John. My name is Greg. Linville, the host here, along with my compatriot Bob Schindler, who's doing many of our other podcasts. Thanks for joining us.